The Iron Widow was bleeding into the vacuum of space. That was the first thing Navigator Priya Ada saw as she pulled herself back to her console. The ship's cooling systems had been torn along the port side, and white-blue fluid erupted into the void in long, slow ribbons, catching the light of distant stars and shattering like glass. Beautiful, in the way only truly dangerous things can be, Commander Yara Osi said. Her voice was level, unruffled, flat as a tabletop that didn't react to what was placed upon it. Priya read the numbers and wished she hadn't. Hull integrity, 31%. Reactors 2 and 3 were offline. Reactor number 1 is running on backup coils, and Chen says it could cut out at any moment. The main battery is dead. Point defense systems are limited to 4 turrets, 2 of which are jammed and won't rotate. Life support she cleared, her throat is holding, but we have a 17% oxygen leak in sectors C through F. She stopped, and they thought of the Alderman. After that, no one said a word. The Alderman had been the Iron Widow's escort frigate for 11 years. It was a good ship, small and fast, with a crew that laughed too loudly at bad jokes. When the Vhet ambush burst from the debris field, the Alderman had thrown itself into the path of 3 kinetic projectiles aimed straight for the Widow's bridge. It had bought them 4 seconds. Those 4 seconds were the reason Yara Osi was still alive to hear the bad news. Casualties, she said. 48 dead, 61 wounded. We started with a full complement of 212. Priya ran the calculations no one wanted to hear. We are functioning at approximately 52% personnel capacity, and that's counting Petty Officer Volkov, who has a broken arm. But he claims he is fine. I am not fine, said Petty Officer Dmitry Volkov from the other end of the bridge. His left arm was splinted with a coolant pipe casing and a piece of his own uniform. But I am perfectly functional. Yara looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then she looked away. That was the extent of the argument she had energy for. The Iron Widow drifted. She was old by the standards of human warships. 83 years. In the context of interstellar military history, she was practically a relic. She had been built at the Callista shipyards when humanity was only just learning how to fight properly in a vacuum, back when the alien empires of the Outer Rim still chuckled at the sight of a species that had burst from its system with fire in its eyes. And having not the slightest notion of what it was stepping into, they stopped laughing somewhere around her 4th deployment. Her official name in the Naval Registry was the Ankh Vessel 441 Escherin. No one called her that. The name Iron Widow came during her 3rd deployment at the Battle of the Morning Rim. 7 enemy ships had gone after her that day. 7 ships sent specifically to kill her. Because the enemy at the time, the Grad Consolidation, now merely a short entry in historical databases, believed she was the weakest target in the human formation. She was not the weakest target. The crews of all 7 ships did not go home. The Iron Widow returned with a hole in her side big enough to park a shuttle in. Her engines ran on prayers and engineering tape. Her crew, bloodied and exhausted, was completely unprepared to surrender. The name stuck. Enemies had tried to kill her 14 times in 83 years. 14 times. They had filed confident reports that she was finished. 14 times, they were wrong. Those reports are now circulated in human military academies as a case study titled Aggressive Optimism Regarding Outcomes. But right now, looking at the numbers on her screen, Priya struggled to imagine how the 15th time would be any different. How far to the nearest relay station? Yara asked. At our current drift speed, 9 days. If we can stabilize reactor number 1 and get the maneuvering thrusters back maybe 4, we could send a distress signal. Priya double-checked the math, because the first answer was one she didn't want to give. Yes, but it will be weak. At current transmitter power, the signal will reach the nearest outpost, Kadir Station, in 16 hours. Yara nodded slowly. She pressed 2 fingers to her lips. Her crew knew this gesture well. It meant she was building something in her head, an architecture of intent, a structure of possibilities assembled from the broken pieces before her. They had all learned over the years not to interrupt her. Send the signal, she said. Standard encryption. Include the full damage report. Yes, Commander. Signal away. It was small, honest, and patient. It sped into the darkness at the speed of light, hoping someone friendly would hear it. 3 light hours away, someone did hear it. It was not a friend. The Vhet did not have a word for possibility in the way humans used it. Their nearest equivalent, translated roughly as the moment the enemy's wound becomes your door, was a concept so deeply embedded in their language that Vhet children learned it before they learned to count. It described not just a tactical moment, but a moral one. The idea that an enemy's weakness should not be pitied, but exploited. Fleet Commander Artavan understood this concept better than most. He was old by Vhet standards. His shell had shifted from a deep amber to the pale gold that comes with age, and the sensory filaments along his cranial ridge had thickened to the point that young officers sometimes whispered behind his back that they were decorative. He had commanded Vhet warships for 40 years. He had fought humans 3 times, which was 2 more than most of his peers, and had walked away from these encounters with a deep and somewhat uncomfortable respect for the species, along with a very strong desire to never engage them again unless the odds were overwhelmingly in his favor. Right now, the odds were overwhelmingly in his favor. The intercepted signal was unambiguous. Iron Widow. And yes, even the Vhet called her that, because the name had emerged as a marker of danger. In the intelligence files of 14 alien governments, she was iconic. 31% hull integrity, 2 reactors offline, main weapons inoperative, life support on the brink. The ship was leaking oxygen and coolant into the void in measurable, consistent, undeniable quantities. His own ships were at full combat readiness. 3 heavy cruisers and the dreadnought Immortal Certainty behind him. The newest and most powerful Vhet warship, built specifically using decades of data on human combat tactics. He looked at the signal printout for a long time. A part of him, the one that had survived 40 years of war, the cautious, skeptical, slightly paranoid part, continued to generate the same quiet alarm. Humans love traps. They build them the way other species build homes, with care, creativity, and terrifying enthusiasm. There was a phrase, translated into 17 alien languages from English. If it seems too easy, humans built it. But the data was too complete to be a fake. Reactor oscillation, atmospheric leak rates, structural stress patterns, these were not things one could fake with such physical consistency. The Iron Widow was truly dying. His deputy, a young officer named Vhet, who had never faced humans in combat and therefore still had the luxury of excitement, stepped closer. "High Command directive is clear," he said. "If we capture the Iron Widow or confirm her destruction on our terms, the political leverage, I know what it is," Artavan said. He continued to look at the screen. He thought of the 3 times he had fought humans. The first time was at the Meridian Crossing, where a human ship with destroyed engines had turned sideways, used its hull as a shield and a ram, and destroyed 2 of his escort ships before finally going dark. The second time was at the edge of the Ashfall Nebula, where a crew of 40 on a ship designed for 120 held a defensive position for 9 hours against 6 attackers and only stopped when every single one of them was dead. Not one had surrendered, even when surrender was offered, even at the very end. The third time, humans had won, and he had retreated. He had spent 3 months trying to understand what they had done differently, and he still wasn't sure. He had fought humans 3 times. He knew not to get complacent. And yet, the Iron Widow's signal hung on his display, patient, honest, and damned. 31% hull integrity, dead guns, leaking into space. "Prepare the broadcast," he said. "Full transmission on all human space frequencies." Vhet's filaments glowed with what translated as excitement and anticipation, the particular zeal of one who has never been burned. "A full demand for surrender to all human space, Commander?" Artavan confirmed. "The Iron Widow is the most recognizable warship the humans have. If we are seen standing over her, demanding their surrender in the shadow of their most famous vessel, it changes what this war means. It changes what they believe. The political value was immense, beyond mere military victory. The Iron Widow was a symbol, proof to humans and aliens alike that a species could be beaten until it bled, but that it would come back, that it would come home, that something could take everything the universe threw at it and refuse to fall. If that symbol fell while the Vhet stood over it, broadcasting demands to all human space, it would destroy something fundamental in the human morale. He convinced himself that was why he was doing this. He set an intercept course. In the engineering bay of the Iron Widow, Lieutenant Chen Fang was not sleeping. She was not sleeping quite intentionally, surrounded by the disassembled innards of the main power system, which she had pulled from the wall and laid out on the floor in a pattern that likely made sense to her, but looked like a catastrophe with ambition to everyone else. She was 26. She had graduated from the Lunar Academy of Systems Engineering at 19, which was unusual enough that instructors and peers checked her diplomas twice. She was very good at 3 things: fixing engines in ways not described in manuals, eating protein bars without tasting them, and finding solutions to problems everyone else called impossible. Right now, she was working on the third. Chen. Petty Officer Volkov's voice sounded over the comms. He was somewhere above her in the distribution room, reading power metrics and relaying them down. "Talk to me." "Still here," she said. "What are we actually seeing?" She sat back on her heels and looked at the components spread across the floor. Reactor number 1 was dying. That was the thing none of the metrics upstairs caught properly. Reactor number 1 was doing something more interesting than dying. It was oscillating, cycling in fast, irregular pulses between states of rest and sudden, sharp surges like a heart with a bad arrhythmia. Unstable, certainly dangerous, but absolutely not dead. And an oscillating reactor, if one were careful and creative enough, and perhaps slightly free of traditional engineering wisdom, could be tuned. The oscillations could be shaped, the surges could be directed. It wasn't what the reactor was designed for. It wasn't what any engineering handbook would describe. It was also, as far as Chen could tell, the only option they had. "We have power," she said. "Abnormal power. Not the power that should be there. Different power." "What power?" She picked up a connection interface and turned it in her hands. "But how? How much time do you need?" 4 hours. "Maybe 3, if Volkov stops talking to me." "I heard that," Volkov said. "Good," Chen said. She inserted the connector into place, and the reactor hiccuped, then leveled out, then pulsed again with what felt, even through the deck, like readiness. Chen smiled. Above her, the Iron Widow drifted in ribbons of vented coolant, patient and still, carrying her wounds through the dark. The distress signal moved outward. It would be 16 hours before it reached human ears. 3 light hours away, the Vhet fleet accelerated. Their weapons were charged. Their commander was confident in his calculations, and his confidence grew with every hour of closing distance. He had looked at the numbers 100 times, and they always said the same thing. The Iron Widow was finished. No one told him about Chen. Yara Osi sat in the commander's chair and didn't move. The bridge was quiet with that layered silence that large, damaged machines possess. The distant hiss of a compromised seal in the ventilation. The soft, intermittent tone of a sensor system on backup power. The rhythmic beat of Volkov's boots on the deck a floor above as he moved between the distribution room and the secondary corridor. The widow breathed these sounds like a very old person sleeping, slowly, unevenly, and stubbornly continuing to live. Yara had been on this ship for 19 years. She knew the sound of every section, the distinct rhythm of every node, the specific vibration frequencies of every stressed structural element. She knew that reactor number 2 smelled different than reactor number 3, a subtle chemical difference in their cooling systems that had never been fixed. Despite 3 service cycles, she knew the observation deck on the left had a specific resonance during the night cycle that no one had ever explained. She knew that in the mess hall on deck 7, at 3, there was a sound that was either a settling support beam or a ghost, and the crew had strong opinions on both points. She knew this ship, and she knew the difference between dying and being wounded. The Iron Widow was wounded. Between those 2 words was a distance she intended, very consciously, to make matter. "Commander." Priya's voice came with the cautious weight of someone carrying something they didn't want to drop. Sensors just picked up engine signatures, about 3 light hours out, moving toward us. Yara didn't move. "How many?" 4 ships. Identification. A pause that stretched a bit longer than necessary. Vhet markings. 3 heavy cruisers and... The pause returned. It got heavier. 1 dreadnought. Immortal certainty. The bridge absorbed this information in silence. The immortal certainty wasn't just a warship. It was the warship, the newest and most dangerous in the Vhet fleet, designed from the keel up using decades of accumulated data on human combat tactics and design. It had never been in a real fight. It was built specifically for this moment, the killing of something already dying. Yara pressed 2 fingers to her lips. "Time to intercept?" she asked. "At current speed, 6 hours. 6 hours." She sat with that number, felt its weight, and looked at it from every angle she had. "Give me Chen," she said. The comm clicked. A pause. Then Chen's voice, distracted, halfway through a thought that was clearly moving in another direction. "I'm busy. I know. How long? 4 hours? Maybe less if the oscillation holds?" Yara looked at the sensor display. 4 Vhet ships moving through the dark toward a ship that, as every report in the galaxy stated, was finished. "You have 4, she said. "Make it 3. A short silence on the line. Then Chen said quietly and with total confidence, "Copy, Commander." The connection broke. The Iron Widow drifted. Outside, the ribbons of coolant slowly spun in the dark, catching starlight, scattering it in pale, cold arcs. Beautiful. As dangerous things are beautiful. Patient, as old things are patient. Waiting. The broadcast hit human space like a rock thrown into standing water. It went out on all frequencies, translated into 6 languages simultaneously, and was accompanied by a visual component that the Vhet had clearly spent time on. Footage of the drifting Iron Widow, still venting coolant, her port side dark and silent, surrounded at a cautious distance by the 4 Vhet ships, arranged in a formation that broadcast, without a single word, absolute and comfortable dominance. The Vhet knew how to communicate. They had been engaged in interstellar politics 400 years before humans left their system. They understood that the visual content of a message was often more important than its words. The words in the standard translation reached the Earth monitoring station about 5 hours after the transmission. "Do you know this ship? Everyone in this sector of space knows this ship. Today it dies. Today we stand over it. We offer humanity one choice. Formal surrender of all human military operations in the Outer Rim sectors, recognition of Vhet territorial claims in the Ashfall and Meridian systems, and the peaceful decommissioning of your forward fleet within 60 days. In exchange, the crew of the Iron Widow will be taken prisoner and treated according to the conventions of civilized engagement. Refuse and we will finish what your combat damage started. You have 6 hours. We will be listening." That was the message one awaited. 6 hours. The Vhet fleet sat around the Iron Widow and waited. The message reached Kadir Relay Station first, which was exactly the irony the universe seemed to love, because Kadir was the very station to which the Iron Widow's distress signal was currently crawling at the speed of electromagnetic radiation. 2 signals, in a sense, were racing in opposite directions on the same road. One was asking for help, the other was announcing that help was no longer relevant. Station Commander Adadiner read the Vhet transmission 3 times. Then she opened the star map, confirmed the coordinates, and sent a priority emergency package to Navy High Command on Earth with a message that contained a total of only 3 lines. Vhet fleet at specified coordinates. Iron Widow confirmed on site. Broadcasting surrender demands to all human space. Awaiting orders. She didn't add her assessment. She didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves, loudly and without comfort. The reply from High Command came in 47 minutes fast for interstellar communication, which told D how many people in command were currently not sleeping and looking at the same map. The reply said, "Received. No military assets within response radius. Forward any communication from the Iron Widow directly. Maintain monitoring." Nair read it twice. Then she did something that was not in her orders. She opened a direct, tight beam channel aimed at the Iron Widow's last known position, encoded it with a personal authorization she was strictly forbidden from using for such messages, and sent the following. "Commander Osi, we heard your distress signal. We also heard theirs. Nothing is close enough. I am sorry. Whatever you decide, we are listening. Earth is listening. All of us." She sent it and sat back, feeling the distinct helplessness of being very far away from something you cannot change. On board the Iron Widow, the Vhet broadcast arrived about 20 minutes after the fleet's arrival. Yara heard it over the bridge speakers, translated in real time by a flat, mechanical voice that somehow made it even worse. The flatness removed any emotional color, leaving only the pure shape of what was said. "You have 6 hours. We will be listening." Silence settled over the bridge. Yara hadn't moved from the commander's chair. She hadn't stood up from it for 3 hours. Her neck ached. She didn't mention it. "They are broadcasting to all human space," Priya said quietly. She didn't say it as information. Yara knew it was information. She said it the way people do when they need to hear themselves admit the weight of what has been said out loud. "Yes," Yara said, "Earth will hear it. Every station, every outpost, every human ship in the Outer Rim." "Yes, Commander," not abruptly just finished. Priya stopped talking. Yara pressed 2 fingers to her lips and sat with the calculations. She scrolled through them in her head as she had been doing since the Vhet signals appeared on the sensors, not looking for an answer she didn't have, but verifying that she had found all the answers that were there and understanding what they were composed of. There were no rescue forces. The nearest human military assets capable of engaging a Vhet fleet of that size were about 11 hours away. At emergency speed, that was 5 hours past the Vhet deadline. The math here was unambiguous. There was no surrender option she would accept. The Outer Rim territories covered 17 human colonies, 60 million people who had built lives in these systems. Claims on just Ashfall and Meridian would cut human supply lines in half. Surrender was not an option. She didn't need to think about that part for too long. That left the third. She tapped the comms. Chen, still here. Update. A pause. The sound of something being pulled into place. The oscillation is holding stable at a level I can work with. I've rerouted the power distribution path through 3 sectors. When I switch the main connection to the tuning cycle, another sound, something settling it won't look like something the ship's systems were designed for. The power output metrics will be wrong by original engineering standards, but it will work. Will it hold under sustained fire? The pause this time was longer. Define sustained, Chen said. Yara decided she could work with that answer. Proceed. You have 2 hours. The comm closed. Dmitry Volkov appeared at Yara's elbow from places where he had been, carrying 2 cups of that dark, bitter, slightly burnt drink the ship's galley produced when asked for coffee. Ignoring the question entirely, he placed 1 cup next to her right hand without comment. His arm in the sling was pressed to his side in a pose of resolute competence. They are watching us on sensors, he said. He wasn't asking. Yes, so they know we aren't moving. They know our power metrics are low. They think we are exactly what we look like. He took a sip from his cup. They think this is already done. Yara took the cup and held it without drinking. What do you think? Volkov was silent. He looked at the sensor display of the 4 Vhet ships arranged around them like 4 walls of a room they had built and locked from the outside. I think, he said slowly, they have never made the mistake of winning before they have won. They have never sat in a room with us when we are like this. He gestured vaguely with his healthy hand, a gesture encompassing the damaged bridge. The blood still on the floor next to the navigation console that no one had cleaned. The dark spaces where screens had gone out and not come back. They see broken things and believe the breaking is finished. They don't understand what they don't understand. He took his cup again. That we break differently. Yara finally took a sip of the coffee. It was terrible. It was also hot and real, and sometimes that was what mattered. 5 light minutes away, Fleet Commander Artavan stood at his display and watched the Iron Widow's sensors. With the patience of someone who was quite sure the outcome was settled, his caution hadn't fully gone to sleep. It was still there, working quietly in the background like a program he couldn't close, but the data continued to confirm itself. The ship wasn't warming its weapons, wasn't generating thrust, wasn't showing any of the signs of power increase that precede combat activity. Her reactors were still oscillating. The hull was still breached. She was dark in every sense that mattered. No response to the broadcast, Ferris reported. No. Did you expect one? Artavan pondered this. Did humans usually respond to surrender demands? His experience suggested that sometimes they did, and sometimes they didn't, and that silence wasn't always what it seemed. At the Meridian crossing, a human ship had gone silent for 40 minutes before the crew somehow made their destroyed engine partially functional again and rammed them. In the Battle of Ashfall, a human commander had responded to surrender demands with a 3-word transmission that, when translated, meant something close to, "Not today, friend," which Artavan found strangely respectful in retrospect. I expect them to do something I haven't predicted, he said. I just hope that whatever they do will be insufficient. Varatson's filaments twitched. With respect, Commander, what can they do? Their main weapons are disabled. Their primary reactor is failing. They are operating at half strength against 4 ships at full combat readiness. Mathematics, Artavan said, hasn't finished being written. He continued to watch. Back on the Iron Widow, Priya picked up a tight beam message from Kadir Relay Station. She read it once. She printed it on a small physical card, one of those old-style cards the ship still kept in a drawer on the bridge for situations when screens were unreliable. She walked to the commander's chair and placed it on the armrest next to Yara's hand. Yara looked at it. Commander Osi, we heard your distress signal. We also heard theirs. Nothing is close enough. I am sorry. Whatever you decide, we are listening. Earth is listening. All of us. She read it twice. She folded it neatly and placed it in the left breast pocket of her uniform, against her chest. She said nothing about it. Her crew didn't ask. Battle stations, she said. Priya looked up from the console. Commander, silent battle stations, Yara said. No active systems, no power signatures. No one moves faster than they need to. We are a dying ship. She paused until she stopped being one. The crew moved quietly, with the specific efficiency of people who had been on this ship long enough to know how to be useful without being told how. Weapons Officer Torres, who had a wound along her jaw from flying console debris, pulled herself to her station and began working through the manual control sequences for the point defense turrets, the ones that still answered. 2 of them were jammed solid. The other 2 could still rotate. Construction Officer Park moved through the forward sections, checking the integrity of seals in compartments that still held pressure, closing the ones that didn't. If the ship took more hull damage, they needed to know which sections could still be saved and which to isolate and forget. Volkov returned to the distribution room and sat next to his panel with his broken arm and bad coffee, and began scanning all the power paths Chen hadn't rebuilt yet, looking for everything that was still working and hadn't been noticed. The Iron Widow went through her preparations in a silence. Vhet sensors watched her sit quiet, motionless, and broken. 3 hours and 41 minutes remained until their deadline. Far away, on dozens of stations, ships, and colony outposts scattered across the human outer rim, people sat in front of screens, listened to the Vhet broadcast, and watched the footage of the Iron Widow drifting in ribbons of coolant. Not all of them knew the ship's history. Some of the young colonists born here in the Rim, who had never seen Earth or the inner systems, knew the Iron Widow only as a name, something the old people spoke of with a specific quality of voice, a weight that young people recognized as meaning this matters. This is one of the things we keep. But they all knew what this moment meant. The Vhet had seen to that. The transmission was designed to be understood even by those who didn't know the details. A dying ship, surrounded. The clock is ticking. On the colony station Cat, a man who had never met any of the Iron Widow's crew, and never would, sat in front of a screen and didn't go to sleep when his shift ended. He stayed. He didn't know exactly why. He just didn't want to stop looking. In the Meridian system, on the edge of the territory, the Vhet had just declared as their price for the Widow's crew, a woman who had lived her entire life in that system, put her children to bed, returned to the screen, and sat there with her hands folded. In dozens of places, in hundreds of different rooms, people looked at the screen, said nothing, and waited. The Iron Widow sat in the dark, surrounded by ships that were sure she was finished. 2 hours and 50 minutes on the clock. In the engineering corridor, Chen Fang touched the connector she had modified 3 times and felt it seat differently. This time, she felt the resistance give way in a specific way she recognized as correct, a deep mechanical intuition that great engineers develop and cannot fully explain. Yes, she said to no one and everyone. The reactor pulsed. Not the weak, irregular oscillation of a dying system, not the arrhythmic stumbling of someone trying to die. This was different. A deep, rhythmic surge that moved through the deck, the floor beneath her boots, like a heartbeat finding its way back. She reached for the comms. "Commander," she said, "I need you to hear something." She listened. The reactor pulsed again and again. Each beat was slightly more confident than the last. "This," Yara said, quietly. "Yes," Chen said. "How long? Give me 90 minutes. Yara looked at the clock. 2 hours and 48 minutes remained. "You have them," she said. She pressed the card in her pocket more firmly against her chest, the one that said, "Earth is listening," and she began to build the final architecture. These 90 minutes had a shape, not an amorphous crawl of waiting, not a stretched void of boredom. These 90 minutes had an architecture. They were divided into tasks, checkpoints, and the steady mechanical language of a crew doing specific things that needed to be done. Organized around a center goal that no one announced out loud, but everyone understood from the moment Yara spoke. Silent battle stations. Torres worked with the point defense turrets. 2 of 4 were indeed dead. Their rotation mechanisms were melted by the same kinetic strike that had disabled the forward weapons array. But the other 2 answered manual control slowly and with protest, grinding, passing about 70% of their design range before jamming. 70% was better than 0. Torres marked their fire sectors on her display, mapped what she could cover, mapped what she would have to give up, where she would focus. If it came to that, Park finished sealing the damaged sections. Sections C, D, and part of F were now isolated from the rest of the ship's atmosphere. He also did something that was not in his direct duties but was very much in his character. He went through every available damaged section himself and ensured no one was left who could have been moved. There was no one there. He knew there was no one there. The casualty count was accurate. He checked anyway. This was the thoroughness the Iron Widow had instilled in her crew over time, the understanding that the numbers on the screen were not the same as certainty. Volkov sat in the distribution room with his broken arm and the relay panel and found 17 power paths that the partial shutdown had left, in a state he described as dormant, not dead. These were secondary circuits, minor channels that hadn't been active before the battle because they weren't needed. By themselves, they weren't impressive. But 17 dormant channels, directed through the rerouted system Chen had built, totaled something worthwhile. He passed this to Chen without comment. Chen added it to her architecture without thanks, which wasn't rudeness but the efficiency Volkov understood perfectly. The Iron Widow had a chapel. Few human warships had them now. It was an older school design feature. The idea that people heading into danger needed a room specifically for the type of thinking that danger provoked. Chapels on new ships had been converted into extra storage, briefing rooms, spaces with more immediately measurable utility. The Iron Widow still had hers. It was very small, barely enough room for 6 people. The benches were metal, and the only light source was an amber emergency strip that had been converted to permanent use so long ago that the crew member who did it had likely already died. It had no specific religious identity. There was a small table and a book with empty pages that crew members had been writing in for decades. The last entries were closer to the end of the book. The early entries had shifted from formal and cautious to something more honest over the years, shorter, more straightforward. The way people write who have something to say but are limited by time. Yara went there for 8 minutes. She didn't read the book. She sat on the cold metal bench and looked at the amber light on the wall, kept herself very quiet, and allowed herself to feel the full weight of the situation, the uncontrolled calm she carried on the bridge. She felt it fully. The certainty that the next few hours would determine not only whether the Iron Widow's crew lived or died, but whether the outer rim colonies behind them would fall under Vhet territorial control, whether 60 million people would spend the next generation negotiating from a position of deep weakness, whether what the Iron Widow represented would survive. This stubborn, irrational, historically documented refusal to stay down or finish here, she felt it all. Then she stood, straightened her uniform, and returned to the bridge. 8 minutes. She had done this her entire career. The discipline here was not in suppressing the weight. It was in feeling it fully in a controlled space so that it wouldn't leak out at an inappropriate moment. Her crew didn't know she went to the chapel, or if they did, they never mentioned it. The Iron Widow had her own understandings. 72 minutes before the deadline, Vhet caught something on long-range sensors. "Commander," she kept her voice level. "Quantum-entangled surge from the direction of the Kadir relay. High priority encoding. Navy High Command." Priya read it. After a moment, the message appeared on the screen short, the kind of brevity that meant someone senior wrote it and then deleted everything except what was absolutely necessary. "Commander Osi, no rescue forces within radius. Your discretion on engaging in combat. The military registry will reflect any decision you make as serving the interests of the service. Navy High Command sends their respects. Admiral Chenwu." She read it on the small screen Priya brought to her chair. Then she looked at the sensor display showing the 4 Vhet ships surrounding them. Then she looked around the bridge. Torres at weapons, Park at construction, Priya at navigation, 2 ensigns at support systems. Volkov's voice occasionally drifting in from the distribution room above. They had given her discretion. This was the most tactful way she had ever been told that no one was coming. "Thank you, Priya," she said. She returned the screen. Then she tapped the ship-wide comms. No battle alarm, no signal, just an open channel that placed her voice in every room of the Iron Widow where speakers still worked. "This is the commander," she said. "You have all heard the Vhet broadcast. You know the numbers. I am not going to pretend the numbers are different from what they are. 4 of their ships against our 1 damaged one is not a fair fight." She paused for exactly 2 seconds. "We are not asking for a fair fight. We are asking for our fight. Chen is bringing the reactor back. Torres is ready with point defense. Volkov found power we didn't know we had. Each of you has been doing your job for the last 3 hours without receiving instructions on how to do it. Because you have been on this ship long enough to understand what this ship requires of you." She paused. "The Vhet have surrounded a dying ship and are waiting for it to finish dying. We are going to explain to them as clearly as we can that they have misread the situation." She closed the comms. In the engineering corridor, Chen heard the commander's voice from the speaker above and felt something move in her chest that she didn't stop to name. She picked up the last connector, the one she had been building a path toward for the last 3 hours, the cornerstone of the entire reconfiguration system, and held it in both hands, looking at it for a moment. This was the one. If it worked, the reactor wouldn't just stabilize. It would do something the Iron Widow's original designers never intended and likely would have strongly disapproved of. It would run at a tuned oscillation frequency in a steady cycle that produced an output higher than the ship's nominal maximum. Not much higher, not safely higher, not the type of higher anyone would call a good idea, but enough. She installed the connector. The reactor did not explode. That was the first good sign. It pulsed once, strongly, and the vibration moved through the deck beneath her boots and up through her legs. She felt it in her spine like a struck bell. Then it pulsed again, smoother. Then, finding its rhythm again, each pulse a little more confident than the last. "Volkov," she said into the comms. "Hearing you," he said immediately. He was watching the output panel. "Tell me, what's the power distribution?" A pause. She heard him working the panel with one healthy hand. "This is not how the manual says it should look. It looks like something I would call wrong if I didn't know you built it." Another pause. "But it's rising. It's stable. It's—" He stopped. "That's enough," he said. In his voice was something quiet, something that was almost awe. "That's enough, Chen." She sat back, leaning against the corridor wall, and looked at the reactor housing in front of her. A worn, ancient, scarred surface of a system that was 83 years old and had been repaired so many times that almost no original components remained. All of it replaced piece by piece over decades by engineers who loved the ship enough to keep returning her. "Of course it's enough," she said softly. "It's her." 40 minutes before the deadline, Vhet sensors began showing something the sensor officer reported with the specific, cautious flatness of someone who wants to state a fact without pondering what it means. "Commander, the Iron Widow's reactor power output metrics have changed." Artavan turned. "Changed? How?" "They've stabilized. The oscillation pattern we were tracking has shifted. The arrhythmia is resolving." "Resolving," Artavan repeated. "The metrics are consistent with a restructuring of power distribution. Something is being directed differently?" The sensor officer's filaments were very quiet. "I'm not sure what to compare it to. I have no reference in the Vhet database for this pattern." Artavan looked at the display for a long time. The cautious part of him, the one he had kept quiet for the last few hours, was no longer quiet. "Distance," he said. "We are holding at 40 kilometers. Standard retreat for an invalid." "Close to 30, he said, then changed his mind. "No, hold the distance. Weapons to active standby." Vratson stepped closer. "Commander, with respect, there are 40 minutes to the deadline. If they are doing something with the power systems, it's likely survival activity maintaining life support, pressure in the hull. Even if they restore full reactor operation, their main weapon is disabled, according to the readings they gave us." "That was," Artavan said. A pause. "You think the readings aren't correct?" He thought of the first time he had fought humans, a ship with destroyed engines, a ship that should have been dead. "I think," he said slowly, "that the Iron Widow has been in 14 battles that should have killed her and survived all of them. I think the crew on board is not a random collection of humans. I think this ship's commander, a woman who has been on this vessel for 19 years and has shown no particular desire to surrender in that time." He continued to look at the screen. "And I think with 40 minutes to the deadline, their reactor is stabilizing." Vratson said nothing. "All weapons to readiness," Artavan said. "All ships, do not wait for the deadline." On the bridge of the Iron Widow, a single tone from the sensor array. "They are moving weapons to full active status," Priya said. Her voice was level, very intentionally level. "How much time do we have?" Yara asked. "At their charging speed, maybe 8 minutes to full combat readiness. 8 minutes to the deadline." They noticed the reactor. Yara looked at the clock. She looked at the sensor display. She looked at her crew. Torres's jaw set tightly over the weapons console. Park stood at the structural node with his hands behind his back. Priya watched her screen with the focused silence of someone who had already decided she wasn't going anywhere. "Chen," she said. "Ready?" "Ready," Chen said. "Volkov, ready?" Yara said. "Ready," Volkov said. "Torres." Torres looked up from the weapons console. Her eyes were calm. "Ready," she said. I took one slow breath. "Release. Bring her up," she said. And the Iron Widow woke up. Not with a scream, but with a deep, resonating hum that started somewhere on the engineering decks and moved up through the hull in a wave that sound a ship makes when power returns to systems that were dark and waiting. Light returned to sections that were running on emergency strips. Screens came back online across the bridge. The deep, steady pulse of the tuned reactor moved through the deck. The floor, like a drum, not the frantic arrhythmia of a dying system, but the slow, intentional rhythm of something that had found its footing. She wasn't at full strength, she was far from full strength. Her hull was still 31%. Her main battery was still dark. Her crew was still half what it should be. But she had woken up and she was furious. On the immortal certainty, every sensor in the fleet lit up simultaneously. For 3 seconds, no one on the Vhet dreadnought said a word at all. Then the sensor officer's voice sounded with something Artavan hadn't heard in 40 years of commanding warships, a quality that existed just below professionalism, just below composure. The early, cautious, controlled edge of fear. "Commander, the Iron Widow is building power." Artavan looked at the display. The readings were wrong. Not wrong in the sense of a sensor glitch or calibration error, wrong in the sense of a situation that had gone beyond all predicted parameters simultaneously. The power coming from the Iron Widow didn't match the profile of her known reactor specifications. It didn't match any profile in the Vhet database for a human ship of her class. This was not what a dying ship looked like. This was not what a repaired ship looked like. This was something for which he had no word. "How?" Varatsan said. It wasn't a tactical question. It was just a question. Artavan didn't answer. He thought about the crew on that ship, the commander who had been on it 19 years, the engineers and officers who had kept life in an 3-year-old vessel through 14 battles that should have been the end. He thought about the concept his people called the moment an enemy's wound becomes your door. He thought about what it meant that the wound was not what he believed it to be. He thought about everything he had learned in 40 years about humans, about the gap between how they look and what they are, about the specific and well-documented tendency of this species to be most dangerous at the very moment they seem most finished. "All fire to readiness," he said. "Now, everything we have." But the Iron Widow was already moving. She moved like something that had been pretending to be still, not fast. The Iron Widow had never been a fast ship, and with 83 years and 31% integrity, the thrust coming from the maneuvering system wasn't the desperate burst of a damaged drive trying to function. It was controlled, directed. The ship knew exactly where it was going and went there without apologies. Yara had already plotted the course when she gave the order to move. She had built it in her head for the last 90 minutes, working with sensor data on the Vhet fleet's positions, their distances, the geometry of the formation. The Vhet had left their 4 ships in a pattern that made good sense if the Iron Widow was going to stay still and die. A perimeter formation. Each ship positioned to fire on the target from a different angle, maximizing coverage, minimizing the target's ability to pick a direction with fewer guns pointed at it. The weakness of a perimeter formation was the space between the ships, the space between any 2 random ships. The specific space between the heavy cruiser on the Widow's port side and the heavy cruiser on her front left, where the geometry of the formation created a corridor maybe 12 kilometers wide, narrow by deep space standards, wide enough. The Iron Widow turned her nose into that corridor and accelerated. "Targeting," Yara said. Torres's hands were already moving. "Point defense is tracking the nearest cruiser. It's at 680 kilometers and closing. I can engage at 40, holding until 30. 30? Yes, Commander," the Vhet responded. They had to rotate to track the Widow's new course, which took time. A little time, seconds of time. But the Iron Widow's entire strategy was built out of seconds. The nearest heavy cruiser, the one Torres was watching, had to adjust its firing sector by almost 30 degrees to get ahead of the Widow's trajectory. While it adjusted, it wasn't firing with full efficiency. The other cruiser in the corridor was further away and rotating even more. The dreadnought Immortal Certainty was now behind the Widow, repositioning its massive gun banks, turning on its mounts. "Energy weapons from the distant cruiser," Priya said. The ship shook, not a hull breach this time, but something structural in the forward section groaned loud enough to hear through the deck. "Minor damage to the forward shield. We are still moving." "Continue moving," Yara said. On the Immortal Certainty, Artavan watched as the Iron Widow drove herself into the gap between 2 of his forward cruisers with something he would have called admiration if the circumstances were different. This was not the action of a damaged ship running blindly to any available exit. This was precise. It was aimed at the very point in his formation that created the most complications, close enough to the two forward cruisers that firing on the Widow risked hitting each other, at an angle where the Dreadnought's main guns couldn't get a clean shot without one of his ships being in the potential line of fire. She was using his formation against him. He had to break formation. He sent an order for the forward cruisers to spread out, open the gap, give the Dreadnought a clean lane. Except the Widow would slip through, not be destroyed at that distance. "She wants to pass us," Vhet said. "She wants to get close to us," Artavan corrected. "There is a difference." He understood it suddenly and completely. The Iron Widow's main battery was disabled. That was real. The readings were accurate on that point. Her main gun array, the forward-pointing heavy cannons that had destroyed 7 ships at the Morning Rim, were truly dark. But close-quarters combat was a different type of fight. All ships backed away from the Iron Widow. She wasn't firing from the main guns. She was firing with something else. The Iron Widow had things that didn't appear prominently in her listed specifications because they had been added and modified and sometimes quietly reclassified over 83 years of upgrades, refinements, and the type of creative maintenance crews develop when they love their ship. One of these things was what the current crew called persuaders. Officially, they were listed in an old maintenance file as Close Quarters Boarding Defense Systems version 3.1, a set of hardpoints for point-blank fire, originally designed to beat back enemy boarding parties if the enemy ever got close enough to try to breach the hull. They were old, they were short-range, they weren't the type of weapon one builds a battle plan around. They were also on a completely separate power circuit from the main gun array, a circuit that had been dark for years but was very much a part of the 17 dormant paths Volkov had found and directed into Chen's rerouted distribution system. At a distance of 25 kilometers, inside the distance where the heavy cruiser's main guns could rotate fast enough to track effectively, Torres opened fire with the persuaders. They weren't sophisticated weapons. They were designed to kill things at close range, and they were very good at it. 4 gun points opened sustained fire, targeting the cruiser's engine section with a specific geometry that Torres had been calculating since Yara set the course. The cruiser shuddered, not destroyed, not even close to destroyed, but its engine power output dropped sharply when the persuaders shredded the unarmored exhaust collectors at the rear of its propulsion system. It stopped accelerating. Its targets degraded as the orientation control struggled with uneven thrust. 3%, Torres said. Reading the cruiser's new power output from the sensors, she looked at Yara with something in her expression that was professional satisfaction, stretched very thin over something more raw. He knows how that number feels. The Iron Widow didn't slow down. She drove through the gap in the Vhet formation at her best speed, which wasn't impressive in absolute terms, but was exactly sufficient for what needed to be done. And when she came out the other side, she turned a hard jerk on the side thrusters. The type of maneuver the ship's autopilot would have refused to perform based on structural risk, which Yara performed manually and accepted the refusal without changing input. The Iron Widow was now inside the Vhet formation. Artavan had 30 years of combat experience, and it served him well for the next 6 minutes. He kept his cool. He continued giving orders. He broke his formation correctly, pulling the damaged cruiser back and pushing the other 2 into flanking fire positions on either side of the Iron Widow's new course, creating a crossfire situation from which the human ship should have escaped. He was doing everything right. The problem was that the Iron Widow was now inside the minimum safe distance for the Dreadnought's main guns. This was the thing Vhet didn't understand, and Artavan understood only half of until now. The Widow never tried to escape the formation. She was trying to get inside the perimeter, inside the standoff distance, inside the geometry where the largest and most powerful ship in the Vhet fleet had to be very careful. Why? Shooting out of fear of hitting your own ships? The Iron Widow wasn't a fast ship, and she wasn't a powerful ship compared to what surrounded her right now. But she was an old ship, and old ships learn things. "Turn the Dreadnought," Artavan said. "Clear the main batteries." He watched his ships adjust, watched the Iron Widow adjust to match. She read his formation changes in real time and responded not with speed, but with placement, positioning herself between the Immortal Certainty and one of the flanking cruisers, so that any shot at her was also a shot that could miss her and hit another ship. The Iron Widow continued firing. The close-quarters persuaders, brutal, relentless, continued to pound every Vhet ship that fell into their radius, not trying to destroy, but to degrade. Stripping sensors, exhaust collectors, antenna arrays, secondary systems, to blind, slow, and complicate every ship they touched. A direct hit disabled the Widow's forward sensor array. Another stripped a section of already damaged hull plating from her port side, and decompression was immediate. Park sealed it in 11 seconds, which was fast, and the crew in that section had been in suits for 2 hours. Another hit found something structural in the forward secondary beam, and the bridge shook hard enough that Priya was thrown against her console. She caught herself, returned to the screen blood on her forehead from where she had hit the edge of the display frame. She didn't mention it. "Still in it," she said. "Still in it," Yara confirmed. The moment that changed things came at the 41st minute of the battle. One of the flanking cruisers, an undamaged Vhet ship that was trying to get behind the Iron Widow, made an aggressive course correction that put it on a collision course with the Widow at a closing speed. Torres identified as an attempt to force a collision. The tactic was sound. At a close enough distance, the Widow's point defense would have had to divide its attention, and the collision itself, even a glancing one at the current level of structural integrity, would have been potentially catastrophic. "Widow's point defense! Track the cruiser!" Torres locked the 2 functional turrets on its forward section and opened fire steadily, accurately aiming not at the hull, but at the cruiser's sensor arrays, those target-indicating eyes that allowed its weapons to find things accurately. At 320 meters, it killed the cruiser's primary targeting array, every bit of it. Multiple simultaneous hits on the array hull with an accuracy that came from calculating this very geometry for the last 20 minutes, and from the fact that she was the type of weapons officer who had been on this ship for 11 years and believed in her work with a completeness that was almost religious. The cruiser's fire became inaccurate. Its guns were still firing, but they were firing blindly. Broad area bombardment, probabilistic attacks, spraying the space around the Iron Widow in hopes of hitting something with no ability to aim at something specific. Artavan saw how it happened. He saw the cascading consequences of it. The blind cruiser was now a danger to his own fleet if it continued to fire. The formation was broken. The Iron Widow was still alive and still inside his perimeter and still inflicting damage every minute. He made the calculation he had been avoiding. "Main batteries of the Immortal Certainty," he said. "Clear fire on the Iron Widow. All batteries." "Commander," the tactical officer said cautiously. "There are 2 of our ships in. I know where our ships are," Artavan said. "Clear fire, full power. Now." The Dreadnought's main batteries reached full charge. It took 8 seconds. 8 seconds for the most powerful weapon systems the Vhet had ever built to reach full readiness. On the bridge of the Iron Widow, every sensor the ship still had screamed simultaneously. "The Dreadnought's main batteries are charging," Priya said. And in her voice in that moment was something else. Not fear, exactly, but recognition of the scale, a specific understanding that what was about to fire on them was not something they could absorb or deflect. Full power. Yara had waited for this moment since she set the course. It wasn't a surprise. It was actually the plan. "Chen," she said. "Ready, ready," Chen said. Now, what happened next wasn't something Artavan had a reference for in his combat database. The Iron Widow had emergency ventilation ports, safety valves for reactor pressure, and scenarios for catastrophic overload. They weren't weapons, they were the opposite of weapons. They were a system the ship used to bleed excess energy into space, rather than allowing it to destroy the ship from the inside. They were located along the Widow's stern and lower hull sections. What Chen had built with the tuned oscillation system wasn't exactly a stable reactor. It was a reactor producing power above nominal through a process of cyclic surges, a process that built pressure with every oscillation. The pressure had no exit because Chen had kept the vents closed, kept them closed, building the cycle, building the pressure. 3 Vhet ships were currently in a tight arc behind and below the Iron Widow, including the Immortal Certainty. Chen opened all 6 ventilation ports simultaneously. What came out wasn't plasma in a military sense. It wasn't a directed weapon. It wasn't shaped or targeted the way a weapon is targeted. It was a catastrophic pressure dump in 6 directions at once, a bloom of superheated reactor exhaust that expanded outward in a sphere and hit everything in the radius with a uniform disregard for natural phenomena. It shouldn't have been possible to aim an emergency pressure dump. It shouldn't have been possible to calculate the timing. It shouldn't have been possible to position her ship so that the geometry of the exhaust bloom intersected with specific targets, and she had done all 3. The Dreadnought, Immortal Certainty, took the entire center of the bloom. It was 8 seconds until the batteries charged and fired. The bloom was faster than 8 seconds. The Dreadnought's main batteries did not fire. For several minutes, Everyone on the bridge of the Iron Widow did something: read screens, confirmed damage, updated structural estimates, rerouted power through sections Chen was still controlling from below. Then it became quiet, the type of silence that comes after something huge. Priya looked at her sensor display for a long time, long enough for the silence to take shape. "Commander," she said. Yara looked at her. "The dreadnought immortal certainty." She stopped, recalculated the numbers. The numbers didn't change. It's not on sensors. The bridge absorbed this. "The forward cruiser with the damaged engines is retreating," Priya continued. Her voice was now level with the effort of being a voice conveying information accurately. "The blind cruiser is following it. The third cruiser," she checked, "is also retreating. All 3 remaining vessels are changing course, moving away from our position." Silence. Volkov's voice drifted in from the distribution room. Quiet, low. The voice of a man who was alone, something he hadn't expected to feel so completely. She did it. No one said anything. Yara sat in the commander's chair and felt the weight of the last 4 hours settle on her the way she hadn't allowed it to settle while everything was happening. She allowed it to settle. The dead, the aldermen, the 61 people in the medbay. The reactor, which was now stepping down to a lower, safer level of output as Chen rolled it back from the tuned frequency. The immortal certainty, which had been the most advanced warship the Vhet had ever built, and now it wasn't on the sensors. She didn't feel triumph. Triumph was a pure emotion, and this wasn't pure. She felt something more complex and more true. The specific, exhausted relief of people who had survived something that should have ended them, mixed with the grief that survival always costs. "Give me Chen," she said. The comm clicked. A pause. "Still here," Chen said. Her voice was very tired. "You did good work," Yara said. Long pause. "She did the work," Chen said. "I just listened." Yara understood exactly what she meant. "Medical teams to all sections," she said. "Then give me a full damage assessment of the ship." She paused. "And someone, please, clean the blood off the navigation console." The Iron Widow drifted in the dark, surrounded by the retreating signatures of 3 Vhet ships that had come here to watch something end and were now leaving with a story they would try to explain for a long time. The coolant ribbons still moved quietly outside, catching starlight. She wasn't finished. She had never been finished. The 3 Vhet ships fled for 9 hours before stopping. They stopped at the edge of the Meridian system, the territory their fleet commander had called less than a day ago the price for the Iron Widow's crew. They stopped there and held position for about 40 minutes. Their sensor arrays pointed back the way they came, and then they moved on, not toward the Iron Widow. Away from her. Away from the coordinates where the debris of the immortal certainty was slowly expanding into a debris field that would take years to settle. The Kadir relay station picked up their departure signatures. Station Commander Adedinner hadn't left her screens for 9 hours. When the 3 Vhet signatures appeared on her display, moving in the wrong direction, not toward the Iron Widow, not toward any human position, just away, she read the numbers 3 times, and then laid her head on her console for a moment, not crying, just breathing, just needing one moment of something other than composure. Then she sat up and began writing the report to Navy High Command, which would be one of the strangest reports she had ever filed. The first line was factual. At 3:47 station time, the Vhet fleet surrounding the Iron Widow at the specified coordinates departed the area. 3 ships, the 4th, the dreadnought Immortal Certainty, does not appear on any sensor return. The second line was also factual. The Iron Widow is still present at the specified coordinates. She is at reduced power, but her transponder is active, and she is transmitting a damage assessment on a standard frequency. She stopped after those 2 lines and sat, wondering if a third line was needed or if those 2 said everything. They said everything. She sent the report. News traveled fast. Faster than distress signals, faster than military dispatches, faster than the cautious, measured communication of official channels. It moved the way things do when they are true and great, and people cannot keep them inside. Person to person, screen to screen, station to station, transmitted through colonial networks and freighter relays, and the informal communication networks humans had built across the outer rim over 3 generations of life away from home. The Iron Widow is still alive. That was the core of this message, stripped of its essential weight, the thing that mattered under all the details and numbers and tactical explanations. They demanded that we surrender. They stood over the most famous ship we have, and gave us 6 hours and were sure of the answer. The Iron Widow is still alive. On the colony station, Cat, the man who had stared at his screen all night, sat where he had fallen asleep sideways in his chair, read the message, looked at it for a while, and then laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, the kind that comes from somewhere deep you didn't know you needed to release. In the Meridian system, in the system that had been named part of the Vhet price, the woman who had put her children to bed and sat alone at the screen, cupped her head in her hands and remained that way for some time, not from grief, from relief. The difference was important, and she knew it, and she allowed herself to feel the full, honest reality of it. In 100 colony rooms in the quiet hours that come before the local day begins, people heard and felt the thing the numbers described. They had been surrounded. They had been given a deadline. They had been told the battle was over, and then it wasn't. On the Iron Widow, the first 18 hours after the battle had a specific quality of post-event work necessary: unglamorous, steady. Medical Officer Okafor had 41 wounded who needed continued care. 2 of them were in the critical range, requiring observation every few hours. The battle had added 7 to the list. No one was in life-threatening danger, but 4 had the type of injuries that needed constant attention and could cause long periods of recovery. He moved through the medbay with the exhausted efficiency of someone who had been on his feet for 14 hours and had learned over a long career that efficiency is how you keep compassion functional when the load is this high. Chen slept for 4 hours in the engineering corridor on the floor next to the power relay she had rebuilt. No one asked her to move. Volkov put his jacket over her and returned to the distribution room and spent 2 hours quietly conducting diagnostic checks on the system she had built, not because he expected to find a problem, but because it felt like the right way to honor the work. The work was sound. He knew it would be. He ran the checks anyway. Park went through the sealed sections with a full damage assessment team, cataloging what could be fixed with available materials and what would require a dry dock. The answer was, about 60% of the damage was fixable in the short term, enough to make the ship more stable for the trip home, and 40% would have to wait for facilities the Iron Widow wouldn't see for months. He noted all of this in the damage log with the thoroughness of a person who believed that accurate records were a form of respect for the people whose work they documented. Torres cleaned the weapons consoles. All of them, not just hers. She worked from one end of the tactical station to the other, methodically and quietly. And when she finished, she went to Priya's navigation console it too. The blood that had dried there from the wound on Priya's forehead, which Priya had allowed the medical officer to close with 2 strips of adhesive bandage but otherwise hadn't stopped for. "You don't need to do that," Priya said. "I know," Torres said, and continued cleaning. Yara wrote the casualty report herself. She always did. Every name, every rank, every section they served in. A short note for each. Not the formal military language of official records, but the type of note only a commander who had served with humans long enough to know what was real about them could write. Not long, not decorated, just specifically concrete things that made each one indispensable to the specific community of the Iron Widow, not interchangeable with any other soldier. She wrote the alderman's crew, too. She didn't know all of them as well as her own people, but she wrote what she knew. And for those she knew less well, she wrote the only fact that felt big enough to carry the weight. They moved toward what was approaching, not away from it. She sat with the finished report for a while before she transmitted it. Then she wrote a separate message, shorter, personal, not part of the official report, to the commander of Kadir Relay Station. "We heard your messages. Thank you. It mattered. Osi." She sent this first, before the official report. Navy High Command received the situation report, the casualty list, and the technical documentation of the battle in one large transmission packet from the Iron Widow that arrived at 1422 Earth Central Time in a room containing Admiral Chenwu, 3 senior tactical officers, and 4 analysts who had been running scenarios all night, trying to calculate possible outcomes. None of their scenarios included an emergency pressure dump. Admiral Chenwu read the technical section twice. Then she put the document down and looked at the analysts. "Did any of our models project this?" she asked. No one in the room said yes. She picked up the document again and read the technical section for the 3rd time. "Give me Commander Osi on a direct channel when she is available," she said. Then, almost to herself, she used pressure dump. One of the analysts, who was young and couldn't quite suppress what he was feeling, said, "That is what it says there. That is what it says there. You cannot target an emergency pressure dump." The Admiral looked at him with the expression of someone who had just been told a fact against which she now had direct documentary evidence. "Apparently," she said cautiously, "you can." 42 hours after the battle, the Iron Widow fully returned her engines online. It wasn't a dramatic moment. The engines turned on in sequence as Chen went through the restart protocol, and each registered on the navigation display as a quiet confirmation. And in the end, they all worked. And Priya plotted a course calculated to the nearest repair facility 9 days, maybe 8 if the drive held stable. Yara sat in the commander's chair and watched the course appear on the navigation display and felt the specific quality of an end that is also a beginning. The moment when something that was sharp becomes something you carry forward. The weight of the last 3 days wasn't going to diminish. It was going to become part of the ship's history, woven into the record alongside the 7 ships at the Morning Rim and the Meridian crossing the other 12 times. Someone had tried to finish the Iron Widow and was wrong. Priya plotted the course. Yara approved it. The Iron Widow turned onto her course. 9 days, Volkov said from the back of the bridge. His arm in the sling was still pressed to his side. He no longer pretended to be fine. He just continued to be useful, which was functionally the same thing. If we're lucky, Priya said. We, Volkov said pointedly, are notoriously lucky. The Vhet High Council received the combat report from Fleet Commander Artavan at about the same time High Command received Yara's. Artavan wrote his report with the scrupulous honesty of a man who understood that the only thing worse than the truth is a version of it that unravels later. He described the engagement in full detail. The approach, the formation, the power metrics, the decision to engage before the deadline. The Iron Widow's course shift, the use of close-quarters weapons, the pressure dump. He gave special attention to the pressure dump. He wanted the Council to understand exactly what had happened, because he suspected that if they didn't understand it exactly, they would spend time building an explanation that would be more comfortable and less accurate. He finished the report with a section that was very short. The Iron Widow is currently heading to a repair facility at reduced power. Her damage is significant, but she is mobile and her crew is functional. The engagement should be considered a decisive human victory. I recommend that this assessment be passed to the High Council's military strategists in full and without modification. Then he added one final paragraph that wasn't standard in military reports and which he included anyway. We intercepted their distress signal. We read it as confirmation of complete victory. The signal was accurate. Every damage figure it contained was true. We made the wrong conclusion from the right data. We believed that what is broken cannot fight. We have fought humans 3 times. I should have known better. The recommendation I make to any commander who faces this species in this condition is simple. Accurate damage data on a human ship tells you what is damaged. It does not tell you what is left. He transmitted the report and went to his quarters and sat very quietly in the dim light for a long time, doing the specific thing experienced commanders do after engagements they didn't win, not mourning, not recalibrating, but thinking, building an understanding that would inform every decision he would make in the future. The Iron Widow had done something he didn't believe was possible. She had done it with a damaged hull and half a crew and an engineer who was 26 years old and a commander he had never met and would, he suspected, spend the rest of his career trying to understand. He sat in the dim light and thought about a species that, when you stand over them in their most broken state and give a deadline, responds by restoring what you broke into something you didn't plan for. He thought about this for a very long time. On the 8th day, because Priya was right about the luck, the Iron Widow entered the radius of the repair facility at Harrow Station. They were expected. The facility had been tracking their approach since they entered the sensor radius. And by the time the Widow's nose appeared on the station's visible light cameras, there were people watching the feed from 20 stations and colony outposts who had no operational reason to look other than that they wanted to see it. She came slowly, as she always moved, with the specific, unhurried dignity of someone who had earned the right not to rush. The coolant vents were sealed. Now, the hull damage was visible from the outside dark, scarred areas where weapons fire had stripped the outer plating. Emergency patches that Park's team had installed over the decompressed sections. It wasn't a beautiful sight. She wasn't trying to be. She was there. She was upright. And she was there. And she entered the approach to docking under her own power. And that was all. The facility controller managing the approach, a woman named Bautista who had managed docking operations at Harrow Station for 11 years and had a carefully cultivated professional composure she was proud of, said later that she held it all together throughout the final docking sequence. She gave approach commands clearly, managed distance correctly, did every part of her job exactly as it should have been done. Only when the Iron Widow's docking clamps engaged that specific mechanical final sound of a ship being held in safety after a long time in the dark did Bautista stop speaking for 4 seconds. Then she cleared her throat and finished the docking confirmation in standard language. Marked the Iron Widow's arrival in the logs with the date and time. She made no additional notes in the official log. The log was not the place for what she would have written. They said everything. Yara Osi was the last to leave the ship. This wasn't unusual. She was always the last. It was one of those practices that didn't need explanation or announcement. The crew understood it the way they understood all things about her that were consistent and carried weight. She walked through the ship's sections while her people were processed by the facility's medical teams, while engineering assessors did their initial review, while the post-event work began in all its necessary and practical details. She walked through the sealed sections that Park had closed. She walked through engineering past the relay casing Chen had rebuilt. She walked through the distribution room where Volkov sat with his broken arm and his panel. She walked through the weapons deck where Torres's blind targeting fire on the cruiser's sensor array at 320 meters had been right every time. She walked through the chapel. She sat on the cold metal bench in the amber light for a few minutes. She didn't write in the book. She looked at it for a while, the old volume with its decades of entries, all the people who had sat in this specific room before what was approaching them. Then she went to the bridge. The bridge was empty. The screens were dark. The commander's chair stood quiet and calm in the center of the room. She took the folded card from her left breast pocket, the one from Station Commander Nair, the one that said, "Earth is listening." All of us, and placed it on the armrest of the commander's chair. A small, specific thing in a big room. A detail that means nothing to people who don't understand it, and means everything to those who do. She looked at the forward viewport. The lights of the Harrow station dock were outside orange and steady in the dark. She looked at them for a while. The Iron Widow was home. She was broken in places that would require months of repair. She had buried 48 of her people, and she would carry that forward. She had done something that would be written about and analyzed and argued in military circles for years. The geometry of the battle, the pressure dump, the specific sequence of decisions that turned the weakness of a dying ship into a trap. But all that was the exterior of it. The exterior, the version that would appear in reports and histories. The interior was simpler. They had stood over the Iron Widow and given her 6 hours and said, "Finish here." And the Iron Widow said, as she always said in the language she spoke most clearly, "Not now, not now, not here, and not on your terms." Yara took the card from the armrest, folded it back, put it in her pocket, and walked off the bridge. Last, as always, behind her the Iron Widow waited in her berth quiet, scarred, patient, already waiting for the next time.